The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, stealing the air from my lungs. It was heavier than the years I had spent in hiding, colder than the nights I'd slept with nothing but leaves for a blanket. Hundreds of the most powerful shifters on the continent stared, their eyes a glittering sea of disbelief and suspicion. Their scents choked me, a tidal wave of pine, iron, ozone, and the sharp, acrid tang of aggression. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast, echoing quiet. I was a ghost made flesh, and the sight of me had frozen the world. Then his voice cut through it all. I never stopped waiting for you. Adric the Lore, the Alpha King, spoke the words as if they were a vow carved into his very soul. They settled the chaos in the air, not with peace, but with the terrifying finality of a prophecy fulfilled. He stood unmoving from his throne of obsidian and iron, his presence a magnetic force that pulled at every nerve in my body. The moonlight streaming through the high-arched windows caught the silver in his dark hair and ignited the storm in his eyes. He wasn't just a king, he was the embodiment of winter, of power, of a wildness that called to the wolf I had kept chained within me for a decade. The scent of him, fierce winter pine, cold mountain stone, and a possessive heat that was his alone, wrapped around me like a memory and a promise. He saw not the ragged woman in worn leather, but the girl whose ghost had haunted him. And in that moment, the safety of my anonymity was shattered forever. The next breath I took was not as a nameless survivor, but as a Lyra Corvin, the girl who was supposed to be dead. The spell broke with the grating sound of stone scraping stone. An elder from the High Council, his face a mask of wrinkled parchment and contempt, took a hesitant step forward. His robes, the color of dried blood, rustled with indignation. I recognized him from a child's fading memory. Elder Kale, his heart as cold as his eyes. "My king," he began, his voice like gravel. "What is the meaning of this spectacle? This waif claims a name that has been dust for 10 years. The Corvin line is a tragic memory, a closed chapter. We all mourn the child." He gestured a dismissive hand toward me, his gaze sweeping over my patched clothes and the wildness in my hair. The humiliation was a hot brand on my skin. "This is an impostor, a charlatan seeking to exploit your grief, or worse, a curse sent by our enemies to sow discord." A low growl rumbled through the hall, a sound so deep it vibrated in my bones. It did not come from the council, but from the throne itself. Adric rose slowly, deliberately, his sheer size and power seeming to shrink the cavernous room. Every wolf in the hall, including the sneering Kyle, instinctively lowered their heads, a primal submission to their alpha. All except me. I couldn't look away. "Her scent, Kale." Adric's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, the sound of an impending avalanche. "Does your memory fail you so completely? Or do you choose to forget?" He descended the dais, each step a silent, predatory beat. He didn't look at the council or his guards. His silver eyes were locked on mine, an unbreakable tether. "She smells of the wildwood pine from the Corvin estate, of the winter rose that grew only in her mother's garden. She smells of fate, the fate you and this council were so quick to bury." He stopped directly before me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. The world narrowed to the space between us, the court, the whispers, the danger. It all faded into a distant hum. It was just him, his scent a storm around me, his presence a shelter I hadn't realized I was starving for. He was no longer the boy I remembered, the one who had promised to protect me. He was a king forged in loss and solitude, his face carved with the harsh lines of duty and grief. But his eyes were the same. They still held the memory of me. Without a word, he reached up and unclasped the heavy, dark fur cloak from his own shoulders. It was the mantle of the Alpha King, a symbol of his absolute authority. He draped it around me. The weight was immediate, a shocking burden of warmth and power. His scent enveloped me completely, sinking into my skin, claiming me. It was an unmistakable public declaration. Mine, to protect, to possess. A collective gasp rippled through the court. Elder Kyle's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "You are cold," Adric said, his voice now a murmur meant only for me. The contrast between his public command and this private gentleness made my knees weak. His fingers brushed the side of my neck as he secured the clasp, and a jolt of pure energy, hot and electric, shot through me. It was the bond, the dormant, half-formed thing that had slept for a decade, now roaring to life at his touch. My wolf, so long suppressed, stirred within me, recognizing its other half with a fierce, possessive yearning that terrified me. He turned his head slightly, his gaze still holding mine, but his words slicing through the tense air of the hall. "The court is dismissed. Send for Lyra's old handmaiden, Ilara. See that her former chambers are prepared. She is to be attended to with the honor befitting her station." He paused, and his next words were laced with steel. "Anyone who questions her identity will answer directly to me. Anyone who shows her disrespect will find their place outside these walls, stripped of rank and name. Is that understood?" The silence that answered him was one of absolute fearful obedience. He held out his hand. It was not a request. For a long moment I stared at his calloused palm, the scars that spoke of countless battles. Taking it would mean accepting this new reality. It would mean stepping out of the shadows and into the center of a political firestorm. But leaving my hand where it was felt like a betrayal of the small, terrified girl I had once been, the girl this man had sworn to find. My fingers, trembling, lifted and settled into his. His grip was firm, impossibly warm, and as he closed his hand around mine, it felt less like a capture and more like coming home. He led me from the throne room, away from the hundreds of burning stairs. The great hall doors boomed shut behind us, the sound echoing the closing of a chapter on my old life. The corridors were long and cold, lit by flickering torches that cast our shadows into dancing giants on the stone walls. His presence beside me was a silent, grounding force. He did not speak, allowing the silence to stretch, giving me space to breathe. But it was a fragile peace. My mind was racing. Corvin Estate, winter rose. He remembered details I had forced myself to forget. Details that made this all terrifyingly real. He led me not toward the residential wing, but to a heavy oak door reinforced with iron, his private study. The room was the heart of his power, filled with the scent of old parchment, wood smoke, and the ever-present aroma of pine and winter that was uniquely Adric. A massive fireplace roared to life, casting a warm, golden glow over walls lined with books and maps. It was a warrior scholar's room, a fortress of solitude, and he had brought me into its center. He released my hand and moved to pour 2 goblets of a deep red wine. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine again. The spark was just as intense, a silent conversation passing between our wolves. "Illyra," he said, tasting the name, making it real. "I never knew what name you took. In my mind, you were always just you." I clutched the heavy goblet, its stem cold against my numb fingers. "I had no name," I whispered, the words raw and unused. "A name is a tether. It makes you easy to find. I was just the girl from the woods, a shadow." Pain flickered in his eyes, a deep, ancient wound. "They will not hunt you again. I swear it on my father's soul." He took a slow step closer, his gaze dropping to the floor as if in shame. "I should have been there. The ambush. I was supposed to be with your guard that day. My father sent me on an errand to the southern border. A fool's errand, I see now. A distraction." The guilt rolling off him was a palpable thing, a scent of bitter regret mixed with his power. It was the missing piece of the puzzle I never knew existed. He hadn't just lost me. He believed he had failed me. "It wasn't your fault, Adric," I said, and using his name felt both strange and deeply familiar. "It was my responsibility," he countered. his voice harsh with self-recrimination. He finally met my eyes again, and the raw vulnerability there stole my breath. This was not the Alpha King speaking to a lost noble. This was the man, stripped bare, speaking to the one person whose loss had defined him. My wolf has been clawing at the inside of my skin for 10 years, Elira. A king without his queen, an alpha without his mate, is an unbalanced thing, a storm without a center. I knew you were alive. I felt it. A flicker of a bond, a thread I could never grasp, but could never ignore. I sent scouts to every corner of this continent. They found nothing. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed you whole. My throat was tight. Mate, he'd said it. The word hung between us, filled with a terrifying, beautiful weight. The pull, the recognition, the electric touch, it all made sense. But I was not the girl he lost. I was a feral creature, shaped by fear and survival. I didn't know how to be a noble lady, let alone a queen, a mate to the most powerful alpha in the known world. How did you survive? He asked, his voice softer now, laced with a desperate need to understand the lost years. I took a shaky sip of wine, its warmth a small comfort. I ran. The men who attacked, they were not shifters, not entirely. They wore the sigil of the northern hunters, but their eyes glowed silver, like ours, and they were wrong. I shuddered at the memory. One of them grabbed my arm. His touch was like ice. I bit him, and I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. An old woman, a healer who lived deep in the Whisperwood, found me. She hid me, taught me about herbs, about how to mask my scent, how to live without leaving a trace. She died 2 winters ago. I have been alone since. Adric's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle jumped. His knuckles were white where he gripped his goblet. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with his barely contained rage. He was imagining it, picturing me, a child, alone and hunted. He set his goblet down with a sharp click and closed the distance between us in a single, silent stride. He reached out, not to touch my face or my hand, but gently took my left wrist. His thumb stroked over the delicate skin, his touch both a question and a comfort. His gaze was intense, searching, and then he saw it. It was faint, a whisper of a scar I'd had for so long I often forgot it was there. A thin, perfectly straight line of silvery puckered skin, just above my pulse point. The place where the hunter had grabbed me. It was a mark that never fully healed like other wounds, a permanent reminder of that day. Adric froze. The warmth in his touch vanished, replaced by an arctic cold. His eyes darkened to the color of slate, the pupils dilating until they were almost black. The protective king, the grieving man, both were gone. In their place was something primal, a predator that had just caught the scent of its oldest and most hated enemy. He lifted my wrist closer, his thumb tracing the pale line with a terrifying reverence. A low guttural growl started deep in his chest, a vibration of pure, unadulterated fury that shook the very air between us. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer a king's. It was the rumble of death. "The silver blade," he snarled, the words ripping from his throat. "That mark! It was made by a hunter's weapon." The name echoed in the sudden tomb-like silence of the study. The silver blade. It was not a name. It was a curse. Adric's fury was no longer a quiet, simmering thing. It was a physical presence in the room, a predator unshackled. The air grew thick and heavy, crackling with an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The flames in the hearth seemed to shrink back, their light flickering nervously. His scent, once a comforting storm of pine and winter, was now scorched with the ozone of pure, unrestrained alpha rage. He still held my wrist, but his touch had changed. It was no longer a question or a comfort. It was an anchor, the grip of a king, holding the one thing in his world he refused to lose again. "They are a cult of hunters," he breathed, his voice a low, terrifying vibration that traveled up my arm and into my very marrow. "Fanatics who believe our kind is an abomination. They hunt us not for sport or territory, but for eradication. And they forge their weapons with rituals, dark rituals. They temper the silver in a distillation of wolfsbane and the blood of their own zealots. A wound from a silver blade doesn't just cut the flesh. It's designed to poison the spirit, to sever the connection between shifter and wolf, leaving the victim a broken, maddened thing trapped between two skins. My blood ran cold. I stared down at the pale, thin line on my wrist. It was not just a scar, it was a brand of hatred, a sliver of a curse I had carried for a decade. All those years, I'd felt a subtle wrongness, a faint disconnect from my inner wolf that I'd always blamed on the trauma of the attack, on the deep-seated need to suppress her for my own survival. Now I knew the truth. That hunter's touch hadn't just been icy, it had been toxic. The instinct for self-preservation, honed over 10 years of solitude, screamed at me. I tried to pull my arm back. A reflexive, panicked motion. The man before me was no longer the boy I remembered, or the gentle king from moments ago. He was the embodiment of raw, lethal power, and everything in me knew to fear that kind of power. His grip tightened, not painfully, but with an absolute finality that stopped my retreat. His gaze lifted from my wrist to my face, and the inferno in his silver eyes was terrifying to behold. Did it? He couldn't finish the question. The fear in his voice was sharper than his anger. He was asking if the poison had worked, if I was broken. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. She is still there, quiet, but she is there. Relief washed over his features, so profound it was like watching a mountain weather a storm. The rigid lines of his jaw softened, the killing rage in his eyes receded, replaced by an aching, desperate sorrow. He lifted my wrist to his lips, and his breath was hot against my skin. He didn't kiss the scar. He kissed the pulse point just below it, a gesture of reverence, of honoring the life that still beat within me, the life the blade had failed to steal. The touch was intimate, possessive, and it sent a dizzying wave of heat through my veins. My wolf, who had cowered from his rage, now rose up to meet this tenderness, purring with a deep, resonant satisfaction that vibrated through my own chest. Mate, ours safe. A sharp rap on the heavy oak door shattered the moment. Adric straightened, his back once again ramrod straight, the king returning to his throne. The air was still thick with his power, but it was now a shield, not a weapon. "Enter," he commanded. The door opened to reveal a woman who seemed to have stepped out of my most faded memories. She was older, her hair now a crown of fine silver where it had once been the color of autumn leaves, and new lines were etched around her kind eyes. But her scent was the same, a comforting blend of lavender, chamomile, and warm bread. Alara, my mother's handmaiden, my caretaker. Her eyes scanned the room, landing first on her king, her head bowing in deference. Then her gaze slid to me, draped in the Alpha King's enormous fur cloak. Her expression was one of polite confusion, but then her eyes, her scent-sensitive shifter eyes, widened. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. Her focus was absolute, her breath catching in her throat. My lady," she whispered, the name a fragile, hopeful prayer. She looked from my face to Adric's and back again. "It cannot be. Elira?" The name from her lips broke something inside me. It wasn't the declaration of a king. It was the rediscovery of a loved one. Tears I hadn't known I was holding back burned at the back of my eyes. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. Alara let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth. She rushed forward and, forgetting all courtly protocol, fell to her knees before me, her hands gently taking mine. Her touch was soft, familiar, the hands that had once brushed my hair and tucked me into bed. "Oh, my child, my sweet lost child, the goddess is merciful. We were told you were gone. Your mother. Oh, your poor mother." Her voice broke and she wept, her tears falling onto our joined hands. I knelt with her, wrapping my arms around her shaking shoulders. The scent of her grief, mingling with my own, was overwhelming. She was real. This was real. I was home. Over her shoulder, I saw Adric watching us, his expression unreadable, a mixture of profound relief and a deep shadowed pain. He had given me this, a link to my past, a piece of the family I had lost. After a long moment, Elara pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at me, really looked at me, her gaze tracing my features. "You have her eyes," she murmured, a sad smile touching her lips. "Your mother's fire, I see it." She slowly got to her feet, her composure returning, though her hands still trembled. She bowed her head to Edric. "Forgive me, my king. I was overcome." "There is nothing to forgive, Elara," Adric said, his voice softer than I had heard it. "You will resume your duties. Lady Elira is to be given her former chambers. I trust you to see that every comfort is afforded to her." "Her chambers?" Elara's eyes widened again, this time with a different kind of shock. "But, my king, they have been sealed since it happened. On your orders." "Unseal them," he commanded simply. "They have waited long enough." Elara's gaze flickered between us, a dawning understanding in her eyes. The king hadn't just mourned. He had waited. He had preserved a piece of her, a piece of his hope, for 10 long years. She bowed deeply. "At once, your majesty." She turned to me. "This way, my lady. I will take you." I looked at Adric, a silent question in my eyes. I didn't want to leave his side. The world outside the study felt hostile and uncertain. His presence was the only solid thing I had to hold on to. He understood immediately. "Go with her, Elira. I will settle matters with the council. Their whispers must be silenced before they become a storm. I will join you shortly." He said it like a promise, a vow. "I will come for you." I nodded and let Elara lead me from the study. The corridors felt different now, with Elara beside me, chattering softly about this change and that, pointing out new tapestries and lamenting old ones that had been taken down. The castle began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home I'd forgotten. We walked toward the east wing, the residential heart of the castle, where the moon shone brighter through the tall windows. My old chambers were at the end of a long, quiet hall. The door was heavy, carved with the Corvin sigil, a rampant wolf silhouetted against a crescent moon. A thick layer of dust covered everything except for a clean path leading to the lock, a path worn by one person's solitary vigil. Elara produced a heavy iron key and turned it. The lock protested with a loud, groaning screech, a sound of time being forced to move again. The scent hit me first. It was faint, trapped, but unmistakable. The sweet, peppery fragrance of winter roses, my mother's favorite. The dry scent of old books. The faint, clean smell of cedar from the wood-paneled walls. My scent. A child's scent, perfectly preserved. The room was a ghost. Moonlight streamed through the large balcony doors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. Everything was draped in white linen sheets, giving the furniture the appearance of silent, waiting phantoms. A large canopy bed, a writing desk, a plush divan by the cold fireplace. Nothing had been touched. Elara moved with a reverent slowness, pulling the sheet from the nearest armchair. "He never let anyone in here," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Not even the cleaning staff. He said it was to remain exactly as you left it. A memory until the day the memory came home." My heart ached. This wasn't just a room. It was a shrine built by a grieving king. It was the most heartbreakingly romantic thing I had ever seen. I walked toward the bed, my fingers trailing over the cool, dusty linen. My wolf was purring again, a low, constant hum of contentment. This place was ours. It was safe. It was his. I pulled back the sheet covering the bed. The silken coverlet beneath was a deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver stars. On the bedside table sat a small carved wooden wolf, its head tilted as if listening. I remembered it. My father had carved it for me on my 5th birthday. I picked it up, the wood smooth and cool in my palm. A memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through the fog of the last decade. My father's large, warm hands guiding mine, the smell of wood shavings, his deep laugh as I made the wolf's ears uneven. "Your father was a good man," Alara said softly from behind me, as if reading my thoughts. "And your mother, she was the moon to his sun. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. So strong." I turned to face her, clutching the little wolf. "What happened to them, Alara? The truth, after the ambush." "After I was declared dead." Ilara's kind face clouded with a pain that was still fresh. "The council used it against them, against your father. They called him weak, unable to protect his own child, his own bloodline. Elder Kyle led the charge. He said the Corvin line was tainted with misfortune. They stripped your father of his titles, his seat on the council. They were disgraced, Elira, broken by grief and politics. They faded. Your mother's heart gave out within the year. Your father followed her that next winter. They said it was the cold, but we all knew. He died of a broken spirit." The little wolf in my hand felt impossibly heavy. My death hadn't just been my tragedy. It had been the weapon used to destroy my entire family, Kael, the elder from the throne room. His contempt wasn't just for an imposter. It was for the ghost of a family he had personally ruined. The anger that rose in me was cold and sharp. It wasn't my wolf's rage, it was mine. As I stood there, reeling from the weight of it all, Ilara moved to the bed, her expression turning to one of practical concern. "Let me prepare this for you, my lady. You must be exhausted." She began to pull back the heavy coverlet to air it out, her movements efficient and comforting. But as she lifted the final layer, the silken top sheet, she froze. She let out a tiny, horrified gasp. I looked over, my heart suddenly pounding. There, in the very center of the pristine white pillow, lay a single winter rose. But it was not fresh and fragrant like the ghostly scent in the air. This one was dead. Its petals were blackened and brittle at the edges, its stem wilted and brown. It was a perfect image of decay. It hadn't been there when we walked in. The room had been sealed for 10 years. It was a message, a threat left for me to find, a promise. "The fate that claimed your mother will claim you too." The comforting warmth of the room vanished, replaced by an invasive, bone-deep chill. The enemy wasn't a memory. They weren't just a rival on the council. They were here. They had been in this room. The door behind us opened without a sound. I didn't have to turn. I felt his presence. A sudden shift in the air, a wave of protective heat that pushed back against the cold dread. I smelled his scent, pine and stone, but now it was sharpened with the metallic tang of alarm. Adric had returned, and his gaze had fallen on the dead rose, a low growl, more savage than anything I had heard from him yet, ripped through the silence of the room. It was the sound of a king who had just found a serpent in his mate's nest. Edric's growl was not just a sound. It was a seismic event. It shook the floorboards, rattled the glass in the balcony doors, and sent a wave of pure primal dominance through the room that made my own wolf flatten herself in submission. Alara whimpered, pressing herself back against the wall, her face pale with terror. The king was gone. In his place was the alpha, a creature of instinct and fury, whose mate had been threatened in the very heart of his den. He was a blur of motion. In one stride, he was at the bed, his hand snatching the blighted rose from the pillow. He didn't handle it with care. He crushed it. The blackened petals disintegrated into a fine, greasy dust in his fist. A scent, foul and unnatural, filled the air. The smell of bitter ash, of rot, and a cloying chemical sweetness that was a perversion of a true flower. His knuckles were white, his whole body coiled like a spring, vibrating with a killing energy that was terrifying to behold. "Out!" he snarled, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. He wasn't looking at me, but at the empty space where the rose had been. His eyes narrowed as if he could see the ghost of the intruder. I didn't need to be told twice. The instinct that had kept me alive for a decade screamed at me to obey the alpha, to seek safety. I grabbed Alara's trembling arm and pulled her toward the door. "Not you!" Adric's voice cut through the air, stopping me in my tracks. I turned. His silver eyes, blazing with a cold fire, were now fixed on me. "You don't leave my sight." The possessiveness in that statement was absolute, a brand on my soul. He gestured sharply at Alara. "You, go to Gareth, captain of my honor guard. Tell him to lock down the east wing. No one enters or leaves. No one. Then bring him to my chambers. Now." Alara scurried out of the room without a backward glance, her footsteps echoing frantically down the corridor. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the storm. Adric uncurled his fist, letting the black dust of the rose fall to the floor like funeral ashes. He looked around the room, my childhood room, and his expression was one of deep, violent disgust. "This place is tainted," he bit out. He strode toward me, his power a physical wave pushing me back a step. He reached out, not for my hand, but circled my waist with one strong arm, pulling me flush against his side. The contact was electric, a jolt of his raw energy pouring directly into me. He tucked me against him as if I were a precious, fragile thing he needed to shield with his own body. "This was a mistake," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I thought to give you back a piece of your past. I gave my enemy a target." He led me from the room, his arm a band of iron around me, his body a living wall between me and the world. He didn't take me back to his study. He strode down the main corridor, his long, purposeful steps forcing me into a near run to keep up. Guards posted along the hall saw the look on his face and flattened themselves against the walls, their heads bowed, their eyes averted. They could scent his rage, feel the killing intent rolling off him in waves. They knew a line had been crossed. He stopped before a set of immense iron-banded doors at the very heart of the royal wing, guarded by two shifters in polished black steel armor. They slammed their fists to their chest plates in salute as Adric approached. He gave them a curt nod, and one of them pulled the massive door open. He guided me inside, and the door boomed shut, the sound of a vault being sealed. These were his private chambers. The room was vast, but it felt intensely personal. It was the masculine counterpart to my own lost room. A space of quiet strength and solitude. A massive hearth dominated one wall, a fire already roaring within it, casting dancing shadows across the room. The furniture was dark wood, heavy and functional. Furs were thrown over chairs, and the scent of pine, wood smoke, and old leather was even stronger here. It was his scent. It was the scent of his soul. A huge bed, covered in a thick black fur throw, stood on a raised dais, a king's resting place. This was the most protected, most private space in the entire kingdom, and he had brought me here without hesitation. He finally released me, but only to turn and bolt the heavy door. He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames, his back to me. The muscles in his shoulders were knotted with tension. "For 10 years, this castle has been a fortress," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "No unauthorized person has breached the royal wing. No threat has ever gotten this close to me. And on the very day you return, a viper finds its way into your nest." He slammed his fist against the stone mantelpiece. The sound cracked like a whip, but the stone didn't even chip. "It was Kael. It has to be." "How can you be so sure?" I asked, my own voice sounding small in the large room. He turned from the fire, his eyes burning with a chilling certainty. "The winter rose was your mother's sigil. Only the old guard, the ones who were on the council when your family fell, would know its intimate significance. Kael was the most vocal opponent of your father. He profited the most from his disgrace, gaining his seat, his lands, his influence. And today, in the throne room, he was the first to call you an imposter, the first to demand you be cast out." He took a step toward me. "This was not just a threat, Elira. It was a political statement. He is telling me that you are a weakness I cannot protect. He is telling the rest of the council that my sentiment for you makes me vulnerable. The cold reality of it settled in my stomach like a stone. I wasn't just a person, I was a symbol. My return wasn't a miracle. It was a catalyst for a war that had been simmering for a decade. There was a firm knock on the door, followed by a voice. "Your Majesty, it is Gareth." Adric unbolted the door to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered wolf with a calm, steady presence. His dark hair was cropped short, and a long, faded scar cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes, a warm amber, were intelligent and alert. He was the epitome of a loyal soldier. His gaze met mine for a brief, curious moment before focusing entirely on his king. "The wing is sealed, my king," Gareth reported, his voice a low baritone. "The servants on duty are being questioned. No one saw anything." "Of course they didn't," Adric growled. "This was not a common intruder. This was someone who walks these halls with authority." He turned to me. "Elira, show him the mark on your wrist." I hesitated, then held out my arm. Gareth stepped forward, his expression respectfully neutral. He gently took my wrist, his touch impersonal and clinical. He examined the thin silver scar under the firelight. His calm demeanor cracked. A flicker of something, disgust, recognition, fury, passed through his amber eyes. "The silver blade, pa," he breathed, his voice laced with a cold hatred I was beginning to recognize. He looked up at Adric. "The attack 10 years ago? It was them?" "And I suspect they did not act alone," Adric confirmed. "Someone on the High Council hired a blade to remove the Corvin heir. That same person is now threatened by her return. Find them, Gareth. I want you to tear this castle apart, stone by stone. I want every member of the council watched. I want Kael's every breath monitored. Find me the traitor." "It will be done, my king," Gareth said, with a conviction that left no room for doubt. He gave me a respectful nod and departed, the door closing with a quiet, final click. The room was silent again, save for the crackling of the fire. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. I felt the last 10 years pressing down on me, the constant vigilance, the fear, the solitude. I wrapped my arms around myself, a subconscious gesture of self-protection. Adric saw it. The anger in his expression softened, replaced by that same aching vulnerability I had seen in his study. He closed the distance between us, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a frightened deer. "I have failed you again," he said, his voice raw with guilt. "I brought you home only to put you in the viper's den." "This isn't your fault, Adric," I whispered. "You couldn't have known." "It is my duty to know," he countered, his voice rising again. "I am the Alpha King. There should be no corner of my own home where my enemies can hide. No shadow they can use to reach you." He reached out and gently took my arms, his large, warm hands covering my own. His touch was meant to be comforting, but it sent another jolt of the bond's energy through me. This time, it wasn't just a spark. It was a wave of his emotions, his fury, his frustration, and beneath it all, a chasm of fear so deep it stole my breath. The fear of losing me again. It was so powerful, so overwhelming that my own fear was momentarily washed away. I wasn't the only one who was terrified. He was. Without thinking, I moved my hands from under his and placed them on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel the frantic, powerful beat beneath my palm, a rhythm that was as wild and untamed as the wolf within him. "I am not a child anymore, Adric," I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I survived 10 years alone in the wild. I survived the Silver Blade. I am not the fragile memory you kept in that sealed room. I will not be broken by a dead flower and the whispers of a bitter old man." He stared down at me, his silver eyes wide with surprise. He had been seeing a ghost he needed to protect. He was only now beginning to see the woman who had clawed her way back to the world of the living. A slow, sad smile touched his lips. "No," he said softly, "you are not." His hands moved from my arms to cup my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. The gesture was so tender it made my heart ache. His gaze was intense, searching as if trying to memorize every line, every freckle, every scar he had missed over the last decade. The air between us grew thick, charged with unspoken words and the magnetic pull of the bond. My wolf was pacing at the forefront of my mind, desperate, wanting, needing to close the final distance between us. The bond, he murmured, his voice a husky whisper. It's screaming. Can you feel it? I could only nod, my throat tight. It was a roaring in my blood, a fire in my soul. It was a primal certainty that this man, this king, this storm of a wolf, was my other half. They think they can threaten you, he continued, his gaze dropping to my lips. They think they can use you against me. They are about to learn how wrong they are. He looked back up, his eyes now holding a new light, not of anger, but of fierce, unshakable resolve. There is a ritual, a formal claiming, the Luna's mark. It binds the alpha and his mate not just in spirit, but in power. Once given, any harm that comes to you is felt by me. Any attack on you is an attack on the heart of the pack itself. Your life becomes my life. My power becomes your shield. He was talking about a full, permanent mating, a ceremony that would declare me, the nameless survivor, as the Luna Queen of the entire kingdom. It was an answer to Kael's threat, a gauntlet thrown down before the entire council. It was a claim. He will not touch you again, Adric vowed, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through my very bones. He leaned in closer, his forehead resting against mine. His scent was all-consuming, a heady mix of pine and power, and the unique, intoxicating scent of my own fated mate. At the rise of the next full moon, I will mark you before the entire pack. I will bind you to me, Elira. I will make you untouchable. His lips brushed against mine, a feather-light touch that was both a question and a promise. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of consecration, a vow being sealed. You will not just be my mate, he whispered against my mouth, the words a sacred oath. You will be their queen, and they will kneel. His words hung in the air between us, a promise and a sentence. Queen. The word was a foreign weight on my tongue, a crown too heavy for a head that had learned to bow to survive. His lips had brushed mine, not with the fire of a lover, but with the chilling finality of a king signing a treaty. It was a claiming, a political maneuver, a shield forged from the holiest of bonds. And I, who had just found my name again, was to be its centerpiece. My instincts, the ones honed by a decade of silence and shadow, screamed. I pulled back, the warmth of his touch turning into a scorching brand. The space I put between us felt like a chasm. He let me go, his hands dropping to his sides, though his silver eyes followed my every move, watching me with a painful, predatory stillness. The alpha in him was fighting for control, wanting to drag me back, to hold me, to mark me then and there and be done with it. But the man, the king who had waited 10 years, held him in check. That is not a choice you can make for me, Adric, I whispered, the words tasting of rebellion. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was defying the Alpha King in his own chambers. You cannot use me as a piece in your game with the council. This is not a game. His voice was a whip crack, the controls snapping. The fire in the hearth flared as if in response to his anger. This is survival, his and ours. Kael left that rose as a declaration of war. He is testing my strength, my resolve. If I show a moment's hesitation in claiming you, he will read it as weakness. He will paint you as a liability, a distraction I am unwilling to fully embrace. The pack will see it, the council will see it, and they will start to question my rule. They will come for you, Elira, not with dead flowers, but with blades. He was right. My rational mind knew he was right. I had seen the contempt in Kael's eyes, but my spirit, the wild, untamed thing that had kept me alive, bucked against the cage of destiny he was building around me. And what if I am not the woman you think I am? I challenged, my voice gaining strength. I held up my arm, turning my wrist so the faint silvery scar caught the firelight. This mark, it's not just a wound, Adric. It's a constant whisper, a coldness. Sometimes, when I'm tired or afraid, I can feel it, thrumming, a phantom poison. The healers told me a shifter poisoned by a silver blade can never fully bond, that the venom severs the path to the soul. How can you claim a mate who might be broken? The question was a blade of my own, aimed at the heart of his grand plan. I saw the blow land. The certainty in his eyes wavered, replaced by a flicker of an old, familiar fear. He took a slow step toward me, his gaze locked on the scar. "Never," he breathed, his voice a low, guttural denial. He reached for my wrist, his touch impossibly gentle this time. He held my arm as if it were the most fragile artifact in his kingdom. His thumb traced the pale line, and where his skin met mine, a wave of warmth spread through me, a gentle, soothing heat that pushed back against the phantom chill I'd felt moments before. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was his power, his spirit, flowing through the bond, a direct refutation of the poison's claim. "The bond between us is older than any hunter's curse," he said, his voice a deep, resonant vow. "It was forged before we were born. No poison of man can sever what the goddess has woven." He lifted my wrist, his eyes never leaving mine, and pressed his lips to the scar. This time, it wasn't a kiss of reverence for my pulse. It was a kiss of defiance, of healing. A searing heat flooded my veins, originating from the point of contact. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of his pure, undiluted life force pouring into me. The chill I'd carried for 10 years, a constant companion I'd almost forgotten was there, retreated, fizzling out like mist under a blazing sun. My wolf, who had been quiet and watchful, rose up and howled in triumph within my soul. The bond between us flared, no longer a screaming thing, but a roaring, incandescent sun. He was not just my mate, he was my antidote. When he finally pulled back, I was breathless, my knees weak. The phantom thrumming was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady warmth, a sense of rightness, of wholeness I hadn't felt since I was a child. He had, with a single touch, healed a part of me I thought was lost forever. "You are not broken," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the other half of my soul, and I will burn this world to ash before I let anyone harm you again." The last of my resistance crumbled. This wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about his duty. It was about this undeniable, soul-deep connection that went beyond reason, beyond fear. It was fate, and perhaps, for the first time in my life, I didn't need to run from it. I nodded, a single shaky gesture of assent, of surrender. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He leaned in and rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. "The full moon is in 3 days," he murmured. "The ritual must be prepared." He was about to say more when Gareth's sharp knock came again, harder this time, more urgent. Adric straightened, the king once more taking precedence. He opened the door. Gareth stood there, his jaw tight, his amber eyes hard. "My kingdom, mine king," he said, his voice low and grim. "There is something you must see. In the archives." The castle archives were in the deepest, coldest part of the fortress, a labyrinth of stone and parchment that smelled of dust and time. We followed Gareth through torchlit corridors, Adric's hand a constant, reassuring pressure on the small of my back. He refused to let me out of his reach. The archives were a vast circular room lined with towering shelves crammed with scrolls and leather-bound tomes. In the center of the room, on a large stone reading table, lay an old, heavy book. It was bound in cracked, dark leather, with no title on its spine. It was open to a page filled with spidery, archaic script. Another man was there, a stooped, elderly wolf with spectacles perched on his nose, lore-keeper Alistair. He bowed his head nervously as we approached. "What is this, Alistair?" Adric demanded. After you gave the order to investigate the council, my king, Alistair began, his voice thin and reedy. Captain Gareth asked me to pull the private ledgers of the High Council from the year of the incident. He gestured a trembling hand at the book. Most are financial records, land disputes, but Elder Kyl's ledger, it contains a hidden annotation. See here. He pointed to a passage. It was a record of payment to a mercenary group for border patrol. But beside it, in a script so faint it was almost invisible, was a single chilling symbol, a crescent moon, weeping a single drop of blood. My blood ran cold. The weeping moon, I whispered. Adric and Gareth both turned to look at me. You know that symbol? Adric asked, his voice sharp. The old woman who saved me, the healer in the Whisperwood. I explained, my voice shaky. She was odd. She spoke of old legends, of bloodlines and curses. She said the Corvin line was special, that we were not like the others. She spoke of the weeping moon. She said it was a sign of a great and terrible prophecy tied to our blood, a forgotten magic. Alistair gasped, his eyes wide behind his spectacles. He began flipping frantically through the pages of another ancient tome on a nearby lectern. A prophecy pupped, tied to the Corvin bloodline. Of course. He stopped, his finger tracing a line of text. Here, it is an old text, mostly dismissed as folklore. It speaks of a time when the moon will weep blood, and a daughter of the forgotten line, marked by silver but not broken by it, will return from the shadows. It says her blood holds the key to either restoring the balance or unleashing a great darkness, depending on the path she chooses. The room was utterly silent. The weight of the prophecy settled on my shoulders, 100 times heavier than any crown. My survival wasn't an accident. The silver blade wasn't a random weapon, it was a mark, a key part of the prophecy. Kyle didn't want me dead simply to disgrace my family, I realized. The pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He knew about this. He hired the silver blades not just to kill me, but to mark me. He wanted to control the prophecy, to either prevent my return or use me. He is not merely a political rival, Adric growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He is a zealot. He has been playing a much longer game than any of us realized. He looked at me, and the possessiveness in his eyes was now mingled with something else, a fierce, desperate awe. He thinks he can control you. He has no idea what he has unleashed. He turned to Gareth. Double the guard on the archives. No one enters or leaves without my express permission. Alistair, I want you to find everything you can about this prophecy. Everything. He then looked at me, his decision made. We proceed as planned. The claiming will happen on the full moon. Kyle has shown his hand. Now I will show him mine. I will bind the heart of this prophecy to my own, before him and all the pack. Let him see that his weapon has become my queen. The walk back to his chambers was a blur. My mind was reeling. A forgotten magic in my blood. A prophecy, my entire life, my suffering, had been part of some ancient cosmic design. Back in the safety of his room, the firelight felt less comforting and more conspiratorial. Adric poured us both a glass of wine, his movements measured and calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. He handed me a goblet. Drink, he said softly. You are pale. I took a long swallow, the wine doing little to warm the chill in my soul. I walked to the large, stone-carved balcony, needing air. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant in the black sky. Below the castle courtyard was a tapestry of shadow and torchlight. As I stood there, a movement caught my eye. Down in a secluded corner of the courtyard, partially hidden by the shadow of a buttress, 2 figures were meeting. One was Elder Kyle, his stooped silhouette unmistakable even from this distance. The other was a figure wrapped in a dark, heavy cloak, their face hidden by a deep hood. My heart began to pound. This was no friendly chat. They spoke for only a moment. Kyle was gesturing, his movements sharp and angry. The hooded figure remained still, a silent monolith. Then the figure reached into their cloak and passed something to Kael. It was small, but it caught the distant torchlight with a wicked metallic gleam, a flash of silver. My breath hitched, as if sensing my gaze, as if feeling the weight of my horror across the vast expanse of the courtyard. Kael looked up, his head tilted, and his eyes, even from this impossible distance, I felt them, locked directly onto mine. He knew I was there. He knew I was watching from the Alpha King's own balcony. A slow reptilian smile spread across his wrinkled face. It was a smile of absolute confidence, of triumph. He held up the small silver object for a fraction of a second, a silent message just for me. It was a small, exquisitely crafted dagger, its blade glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence under the moon. A silver blade. Then he turned and melted back into the shadows, the hooded figure vanishing with him. He wasn't hiding his treason. He was flaunting it. He was telling me that no wall was high enough, no guard strong enough. He was telling me that the king's protection meant nothing. He could still reach me. The cold from the balcony followed me into the room, a venomous chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Kael's smile was seared into my mind, an image of triumphant evil, the silver dagger, a promise of pain. I stumbled back from the balcony doors, my hand flying to my wrist, to the scar that suddenly felt like it was burning. The world tilted, the roaring fire in the hearth shrinking to a pinprick of light in a universe of gathering darkness. Adric was at my side in an instant. He hadn't seen the smile, hadn't seen the blade, but he felt my terror through the bond as if it were his own. "Elara, what did you see?" His voice was a low, urgent command, his hands gripping my shoulders, steadying me. "Kael," I choked out, the name like poison on my tongue. He was in the courtyard, with someone else, a figure in a hood. They gave him a dagger, a silver blade. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with the horror of it. He saw me, Adric. He looked right at me, and he smiled. For a single terrifying moment, Adric was utterly still. The air in the room became heavy, compressed, as if the very molecules were bracing for an explosion. Then it came. A sound tore from his throat that was not human. It was a roar of pure, untempered rage, the sound of an alpha whose authority had been mocked, whose mate had been threatened under his own roof. It was the sound of a king declaring war. The force of it shook the very foundations of the room. A crystal goblet on a nearby table shattered, its ringing demise lost in the ferocity of his cry. He released me and stalked back to the balcony, his hands clenched into fists so tight the bones cracked. He stared down into the empty courtyard, his body a terrifying silhouette of potential violence. I could feel his wolf clawing at his skin, begging to be released, to hunt, to tear the throat from the traitor who dared to smile at his queen. "He flaunts it," Adric snarled, his voice a low vibration of murderous intent. "He does not hide in the shadows. He stands in the heart of my home and shows his fangs. This is not a man who can be reasoned with. This is a cancer that must be cut out." "You cannot attack him," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. The initial shock was hardening into a cold, diamond-hard fury. "That's what he wants. He wants you to act out of rage, to appear an unstable tyrant so the council will rally behind him. He is goading you." He turned from the balcony, his silver eyes blazing with a light that was barely sane. "And what would you have me do? Sit and wait for his next move, for another dead rose, for that dagger to find its way to your heart?" "No," I said, walking toward him, closing the distance between us until I stood in the storm of his fury. "We don't wait. We strike, but not with claws and teeth. Not yet. We use the weapon he has handed us, the ceremony." I looked up at him, my resolve solidifying. The girl who hid in the woods was gone. A queen was beginning to take her place. "You said it yourself. The claiming will make an attack on me, an attack on the heart of the pack. You wanted to do it in 3 days. Do it tomorrow." His rage faltered, replaced by shock. "Tomorrow, Elira, the ritual requires preparation. The moon scribe must be summoned. The Heartwood Grove must be consecrated. It is not a thing to be rushed. Then rush, I insisted. His smile was a promise, Adric. He is not waiting for the full moon. Why should we? Let the pack see you act with speed and conviction. Let the council see that their threats do not make you hesitate. They make you decisive. Bind me to you tomorrow, at sunset, as the moon begins her rise. Do it before he has time to plot his next move. He stared at me, truly seeing me. He saw the iron in my spine, the fire in my eyes that matched his own. I was not just the object of his protection. I was his partner in this war. The fury in his gaze slowly subsided, replaced by a fierce, burning pride. So be it, he said, his voice resonating with power. He reached out, not to touch my face or hold my hand, but to rest his palm flat against my chest, directly over my heart. The gesture was possessive, profound. I could feel his warmth, his strength seeping into me. Tomorrow at moonrise, we will forge a vow in fire and moonlight, and we will show them all what it means to threaten a queen. I covered his hand with my own, feeling the bond between us hum with a new shared purpose. It was no longer just a pull of fate. It was a pact, a promise of mutual defense, a vow that we would face the coming storm together. The next day was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Adric moved with the speed and force of a lightning strike. Ravens were dispatched, guards were mobilized, and a palpable tension descended upon the castle. Whispers flew through the corridors like dry leaves in a wind. The Alpha King was performing the Luna's claiming, a generation before it was expected, with a woman who, a day ago, was thought to be a ghost. Alara arrived in Adric's chambers, her face a mixture of excitement and awe. With her were two other handmaidens, their arms laden with silks and velvets. They were to prepare me. A claiming ceremony this swift has not been performed in a century, Alara whispered as she brushed out my long, tangled hair. Her touch was gentle, but her hands trembled slightly. It is a sign of a great love, my lady, or a great danger. Perhaps it is both, I murmured, watching my own reflection in the silver-backed mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her eyes held a weariness that spoke of a decade of hardship, but also a new, steely resolve. The wildness was still there, but it was being forged into something else, something stronger. They bathed me in water infused with herbs I recognized from my time with the healer. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for loyalty, and wolfsbane, not the poison, but the flower itself, a symbol of our dual nature. They dressed me not in a gown of white, but in a sheath of deep, midnight blue velvet that felt like wearing the night sky itself. It was simple, unadorned, save for fine silver embroidery at the cuffs and collar that depicted intertwined wolves, their heads thrown back in a silent howl. It was not the dress of a princess. It was the vestment of a warrior priestess. As sunset approached, casting long, bloody fingers of light across the stone floor, Adric came for me himself. He dismissed the handmaidens with a flick of his wrist. He, too, was changed. He wore no crown, no kingly robes. He was dressed in simple black leather trousers and a loose-fitting tunic of dark gray, emphasizing the raw power of his physique. He looked less like a king and more like the primal wolf god he was. His silver eyes devoured me, a flicker of heat and possession in their depths. "You look magnificent," he breathed. "I feel like I am walking to my execution or my coronation," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I cannot tell which." "They are one and the same," he replied, his expression deadly serious. "Tonight, the girl named Elira Corvin dies a second time, and the Luna Queen of the Thalor pack will be born from her ashes." He held out his hand. "It is time." I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding. Together we walked from the room, our silent procession watched by every guard we passed, their faces grim and resolute. The Heartwood Grove was a sacred space at the very center of the castle grounds, an ancient circle of impossibly large weirwood trees, whose leaves were the color of blood and whose bark was as white as bone. In the center of the grove was a flat, moss-covered stone altar. The entire pack was gathered, hundreds upon hundreds of shifters, forming a silent, living circle around the grove. Their scents filled the air, pine and damp earth, anticipation and fear. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the twilight, were a constellation of gold, green, and blue, all fixed upon us. I saw Kyle standing with the other elders, his face an impassive mask, but his eyes glittered with a cold, watchful light. He was here to witness his own defeat, or my destruction. An ancient woman stood beside the altar. She was impossibly old, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes the milky white of the blind. This was the moon scribe, the keeper of their oldest rituals. She smelled of dried herbs, old parchment, and a faint otherworldly scent of ozone, as if she stood closer to the sky than the rest of them. Adric led me to the center, to the altar. He stood on one side, me on the other, the moon scribe between us. The last rays of sunlight vanished, and the world was plunged into the deep blue of twilight. A perfect, luminous full moon began to rise above the trees, bathing the grove in an ethereal silver light. The moon scribe raised her arms. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the reedy sound of an old woman, but a powerful, resonant chant that echoed in the unnatural silence. She spoke the old tongue, the language of the first wolves, a litany of names and oaths that stretched back through Adric's bloodline. As she chanted, Adric's eyes locked with mine. The silver in them began to glow, the power rising in him, a visible aura of shimmering energy. I felt the bond pulse between us, a living, breathing thing. This was it, the moment of truth. The moon scribe fell silent. The chant was over. She turned her blind eyes toward me. "The prophecy names you, daughter of the forgotten moon," she said, her voice now a quiet, piercing whisper that only Edric and I could hear. "It says your blood is the key. The ritual of the Luna's claiming is ancient, but for you, it must be older still. The standard marking of the flesh is not enough to bind a power like yours, to bind fate itself." Adric tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What do you mean?" The moon scribe did not look at him. She held out a small obsidian bowl. "The vow must be sealed not just in spirit, but in blood. Your blood, Elira Corvin. It is the only thing strong enough to sanctify this bond and awaken the magic that sleeps within you. It is the only thing that can truly show the pack that you are theirs, and they are yours." She turned to Adric. "And you, Alpha King, you must be the one to draw it." She offered him a small, wickedly sharp ritual knife, its handle carved from weirwood, its blade forged from obsidian. My heart stopped. Kyle wanted my blood with a silver dagger. The moon scribe was demanding it with a sacred one. Adric stared at the knife, then at me, his face a mask of conflict. To claim me, to protect me, he first had to wound me. He took the knife. His hand was steady, but I could feel the tremor of his soul through the bond. He walked around the altar until he stood directly before me. The entire pack watched, silent and unblinking. He raised the knife. I held out my left hand, my palm upturned over the obsidian bowl. I did not flinch. I met his glowing silver eyes, and in them I saw not a king or a predator, but my mate, my other half, caught in an impossible choice. "This will hurt," he whispered, his voice ragged with an agony that was all his own. "I have felt worse," I whispered back, my gaze unwavering. He drew the blade swiftly across my palm. The pain was a sharp, clean fire, nothing like the icy poison of the hunter's blade. Blood, dark as wine in the moonlight, welled up instantly, spilling over my skin and dripping into the bowl with a soft, rhythmic patter. The scent of it rose into the air, rich and potent. It didn't smell like the blood of a normal shifter. It smelled of ancient earth, of deep magic, of winter roses and forgotten moonlight. A collective gasp went through the pack. Their eyes widened, the glow intensifying. They could smell it. They could smell the truth of the prophecy in my veins. Kyle's mask of indifference finally broke. A look of pure, unadulterated fury flashed across his face before he suppressed it. He had failed. He hadn't controlled the prophecy. He had only managed to awaken it for his greatest enemy. My blood filled the bottom of the bowl. Adric lowered my hand and his head, pressing his lips to the open wound on my palm. He didn't just kiss it. He drank. He took my blood, my pain, my magic, my very life force into himself. The bond between us exploded, a supernova of power and sensation, and I cried out as our souls finally, irrevocably, merged into one. He lifted his head, my blood staining his lips, his eyes blazing with a power that was no longer just his own. He was filled with my magic, and I was anchored by his strength. He was no longer just the Alpha King. He was something more. He leaned in, his voice a possessive, triumphant growl that carried across the entire grove. "Now," he said, looking not at me, but past me, his glowing eyes fixed on the traitor in the crowd. "Now you are mine. Now let them try to touch you." The last drop of my blood disappeared from Adric's lips, and the bond between us snapped into place with the force of a star being born. A wave of incandescent energy erupted from us, a silent silver shock wave that washed over the entire grove. The very air shimmered. The blood-red leaves of the weirwood trees trembled, and the moonlight seemed to bend and intensify around us. I felt everything. His decade of aching loneliness, the crushing weight of his crown, the ferocious, unending well of love he had for the memory of me, now directed with the force of a tidal wave at the woman I had become. It was overwhelming, a torrent of emotion and power that threatened to drown me, but beneath it, his strength became my anchor, his soul a fortress for mine. He looked past me, his eyes pinning Kael in place with a gaze more potent than any physical shackle. "Now let them try to touch you." The words were not a boast. They were a law of nature. The pack felt it. The truth of our bond, sanctified and magnified by the magic in my blood, was now the undeniable center of their universe. One by one, then in a great rustling wave, they dropped to one knee. Warriors, elders, mothers, youths, the entire pack knelt in the silver moonlight. Their heads bowed not in fear of their king, but in reverence for their queen. For me, the air filled with their scents, a potent cocktail of awe, submission, and a fierce, newfound loyalty. All knelt except one. Kyle remained standing, his face a bloodless mask of fury. The pack's submission was his ultimate defeat, a public stripping of his influence. He held Edric's gaze for a long, venomous moment before executing a bow so stiff it was an insult. Without a word, he turned, his back ramrod straight, and stalked away from the grove, the crowd parting before him like water before a poisoned blade. He was not surrendering. He was retreating to plan his final strike. Adric's attention snapped back to me. The raw power in his eyes softened as he took in my expression, as he felt my shock and exhaustion through the bond. Without a word, he lifted me into his arms. I was weightless. He carried me from the grove, moving through his kneeling pack, as if they were statues in a sacred garden. He didn't take me back to his chambers. He took me to mine. My room had been transformed. The dusty sheets were gone. The fire was lit, casting a warm, gentle glow. The bed had been turned down, and the air was filled with the fresh, clean scent of lavender. Adric set me down gently on the edge of the bed. He knelt before me, his alpha king, ruler of wolves, kneeling to his mate. He took my injured hand, his touch infinitely tender. The cut was no longer bleeding. A faint silvery light pulsed softly from the wound, knitting the flesh back together before my very eyes. This was the magic. My magic, awakened. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain that was entirely his own. "I'm sorry I had to hurt you." "You didn't," I said, my voice soft. I reached out with my other hand and touched his face, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. Through the bond, I could feel the truth. The obsidian knife had hurt him more than it had hurt me. You healed me, Adric. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing, a shudder racking his powerful frame. He was letting go of a decade of grief, of guilt, of solitary rule. I felt it all wash away, replaced by a profound, soul-deep peace that originated from me, from our connection. I was his storm's center. He was my Afiha harbor. He opened his eyes, and the silver in them was soft, luminous, like the moon that now shone through the balcony doors. For 10 years I ruled with my shadow, he murmured. The ghost of you was always at my shoulder. My pack had a king, but they had no heart, no light. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing the newly healed skin on my palm. Now they have a queen. You are the light to my shadow, Illyra, the balance I thought I had lost forever. His words were a more powerful vow than any ritual. He was mine, and I was his, not by fate or prophecy, but by choice. He leaned in, and this time, his kiss was not a promise or a consecration. It was a culmination. It was fire and moonlight, shadow and soul. A decade of longing poured into a single, breathtaking moment. It was a kiss that sealed not just a bond, but a future. The moment was shattered by a frantic pounding on the door. My king, you must come at once! It was Gareth's voice, sharp with an urgency that sliced through the peace like a shard of glass. Adric pulled back, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. The king returned, his eyes hardening to steel. He strode to the door and threw it open. Gareth stood there breathless, his armor askew. He's in the Great Hall, Gareth panted. Kale, he invoked the blood challenge. He has supporters. He's claiming your bond with the Luna is a curse, that her prophetic blood makes her a corrupting influence. He's challenging your right to the throne. It was a coup, a desperate, final gamble. Adric's face became a mask of cold fury. He will die for this. Wait, I said, rising from the bed. I walked to stand beside him, my hand finding his. The bond between us was a channel. I poured my own newfound calm into him, tempering his rage with my resolve. He wants to fight the Alpha King. Let him face the Luna Queen as well. Adric looked down at me, and a flicker of a smile touched his lips. My queen, he said, his voice laced with pride. The Great Hall was a theater of tension. Kael stood before the twin thrones on the dais, his back to them, facing the assembled members of the court and council who had answered his summons. Behind him stood a dozen shifters, their faces hard and set. Among them, I saw the captain who had been on duty the day of my ambush, his face pale with a mixture of guilt and defiance. Kael had gathered his co-conspirators. He held the silver dagger I had seen in the courtyard. It gleamed with a malevolent light in the torchlight. Adric Thalor has bound himself to a witch. Kael's voice rang through the hall, filled with righteous fury. He has embraced a tainted bloodline, a prophecy of darkness. He asks you to kneel to a woman whose very magic is an abomination, a weapon of our enemies. Adric and I entered from the main doors, walking side by side down the long aisle. The crowd parted before us, their sense a confusing mix of fear, loyalty, and doubt. Kael's words were poison, and some were beginning to believe him. You speak of weapons, Kael, Adric's voice boomed, silencing the elder. Yet you are the one who holds a hunter's blade in this hall. You who conspired with our oldest enemy to murder a child. I did what was necessary to protect this pack from a curse, Kael spat, gesturing at me with the dagger. Her return heralds not an age of peace, but one of chaos. The prophecy is a lie, twisted to serve the darkness she carries within her. He was afraid. Beneath his anger, I could feel it through the bond, which was now so sensitive it was like a sixth sense. Kael was terrified of the magic in my blood. He wasn't trying to control it, he was trying to destroy it. You are wrong, I said, my voice clear and strong. It carried through the vast hall, drawing every eye. I stepped forward, away from Adric's protective shadow, into the light. The magic in my blood is not a curse. It is a legacy, and it does not answer to you. I held out my left hand, palm up. The skin was smooth, unblemished, but I could still feel the echo of the wound, the ghost of the magic. I focused on Kyle, on the darkness I could sense swirling around him. His ambition, his hatred, his fear. I reached for the power inside me, not to attack, but to reveal. A soft silver light began to glow from my palm. It was the same light that had healed me, but now it expanded, illuminating the space between us. It was a light of pure, undeniable truth. As it touched Kyle, a wave of revulsion washed through the onlookers. They could suddenly smell it. The scent of his deceit, of his conspiracy with the silver blades. The bitter tang of a decade of lies. It all poured off him, a foul stench that made wolves snarl and pull back in disgust. The silver light illuminated the dagger in his hand, and the blade began to scream. A high, piercing shriek of tormented energy filled the hall as the pure, natural magic of my blood reacted violently with the dark, ritualistic poison coating the weapon. The dagger grew hotter and hotter until it glowed a malevolent red. Kyle cried out, dropping the blade as it seared his flesh. It clattered to the stone floor, the poison burning a smoking black sigil into the stone. Exposed, his lies turned to ash in the silver light of truth. Kyle was no longer a politician. He was a cornered animal. With a feral roar, he lunged, not at Adric, but at me. He was a blur of motion, his elder's frailty a deception, his own claws extended, aimed for my throat. Adric moved like lightning to intercept him. A black and gray blur of protective fury, but he wasn't the only one. From the crowd, another shape launched itself forward. Gareth. He met Kyle mid-lunge, a clash of bodies that ended with Gareth standing and Kyle on the floor, the captain's blade at his throat. The other conspirators, seeing their leader defeated and exposed, threw down their weapons, surrendering to the honor guard that quickly surrounded them. It was over. The silver light from my hand faded. The hall was silent. The only sounds the crackling of torches and Kale's ragged, defeated breaths. I walked toward him, Edric a silent, powerful presence at my side. I looked down at the disgraced elder, his face a ruin of hatred and failure. "My family is at peace, Kale," I said, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a cold, final pity. "You can no longer harm them. You can no longer harm anyone." Adric gestured to Gareth. "Take him to the cells. He will await the justice of the Queen." As Gareth hauled him away, Kyle looked back at me one last time, his eyes filled with a final, desperate question. "What are you?" I met his gaze, and for the first time I knew the answer. "I am the balance," I said softly. The pack had their answer, as one. Every shifter in the great hall, friend and former foe alike, knelt before me. It was not the ritualistic submission of the grove. It was a true, heartfelt pledge of fealty. They had seen the truth. I turned to Adric. The king, the alpha, the shadow, all of it was there. But what I saw most clearly in his silver eyes was the man. The man who had waited. The man who had never given up hope. He reached out and gently cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. The bond between us flowed with a current of pure, unadulterated love. The war was over. The whispers were silenced. The prophecy was not a curse to be feared, but a promise to be fulfilled, and we would fulfill it together. The king had found his queen. The shadow had found its light. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my old room, which was now our room. The midnight blue velvet gown I wore was a shade deeper than the one from the claiming ceremony, a symbol of a promise fulfilled. The air was cool and crisp with the coming autumn, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the castle hearths and the sharp, clean fragrance of the surrounding pine forest. The full moon, a familiar silver sentinel, hung in the sky, bathing the world in a light that felt like a blessing. Adric's arms wrapped around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. His warmth was a familiar comfort, his scent a constant, grounding presence in my life. He placed his hand over mine on the cool stone of the balustrade, his fingers lacing with mine. Through the bond, I felt not the raging storm or the lonely king I had first encountered, but a deep, resonant peace that mirrored my own. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "Everything," I answered honestly. And nothing. It was true. The past year had been a whirlwind of change. Kyle and his co-conspirators had faced a quiet justice, stripped of their names and titles and exiled to the barren lands, a fate worse than death for a shifter. The Silverblade cult, deprived of their high-placed patron, had been systematically dismantled by Gareth's honor guard, their shadow of hatred driven back into the darkest corners of the world. The council had been rebuilt, not on a foundation of fear and ambition, but on one of trust and loyalty, with wise new voices who saw my magic not as a threat, but as a gift. The pack was thriving. They had their balance. The king's shadow to rule with strength and unwavering justice, and the queen's light to lead with compassion and truth. I had spent my days with Alistair in the archives, rediscovering the history of my bloodline. The Corvin magic was not one of darkness, but of empathy and clarity. It was the magic of a truth-seer, a healer of spirits, a weaver of bonds. The prophecy had never been about unleashing chaos. It had been about restoring a broken connection between the pack and its heart, between a king and his queen, between my own past and my future. I turned in Adric's arms to face him. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and the endless loving depths of his eyes. The harsh lines of grief that had once carved his face had softened, replaced by a quiet contentment that made him look younger, more like the boy I had once known. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "The silence, the solitude?" I considered it for a moment. The 10 years in the Whisperwood had been a crucible, shaping me, hardening me, but they had also been lonely, so incredibly lonely. "I miss the quiet of the woods," I said, "but I don't miss the silence. Here with you, with the pack. It's a different kind of quiet. It's the quiet of a heart that is no longer running. It's the quiet of being home." A slow smile spread across his lips, a genuine, breathtaking smile that still made my heart skip a beat. "Good," he said simply, "because I have no intention of ever letting you run again." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss filled with the comfortable intimacy of 1,000 shared moments. It was no longer the desperate, claiming kiss of our reunion, but the steady, sure kiss of a husband, a partner, a mate whose soul was perfectly, irrevocably intertwined with my own. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against his, our breaths mingling. Below us, in the Heartwood Grove, the blood-red leaves of the weirwood trees rustled in the gentle breeze. The castle was quiet, the pack was sleeping, and the world felt at peace. My hand went to my own abdomen, a subconscious protective gesture. A new secret, a new promise was growing there. A life forged from shadow and light, from a disgraced bloodline and a king's unending vow. A new heir, a new beginning. Adric felt my thoughts through the bond, felt the tiny flicker of new life, and his own hand came to rest over mine. His breath caught, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me from him, so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. He looked at me, his silver eyes luminous with wonder and a love so profound it left no room for words. He didn't need them. I could feel it all. They said I had died long ago. They had been wrong. My life had not ended in that ambush. It had been waiting for the king who never stopped searching, waiting for the moment I would finally step out of the shadows and claim my name, my magic, my destiny. I was Elira Corvin Thalor, the girl who had been lost and found, the woman who had been marked by silver but healed by love. The ghost of a false death who had become the lifeblood of a king, the heart of a pack, and the bearer of its future. Here, in the arms of my mate, under the light of the full moon, I was finally, completely alive.